So thank you everybody for coming. So what I want to do is maybe to introduce the book Panorama and elsewhere. And I would like to talk a little bit about the different ideas behind and about the design of the book. And that's it. So you'll see I think there will be a lot of echoes between what John said and what Justin said as well. So talking about landscape, so I think for a photographer, landscape is a question of space and gaze, and from then, so it's a question of location. And according to Tim Robinson, for location to become a place, there is three things very important: beauty, strangeness, and antiquity. So I won't talk about beauty and strangeness because John talked about strangeness already. And as Charles Baudelaire said, le beau est bizarre, the beautiful is strange or bizarre. But I would like to come back to antiquity. So there's a link now with Justin. And Tim Robinson defines antiquity as, I read it like this, as a particular position through space and time. For example, when he described the alignment in Locaina Valley, for example, that he discovered. And if you read again that passage, the words he's using are all about optical terms, for example. So from there, a place is a question of angle and distance. And then, so it's a question of dimensions. I was asking myself, what are the dimensions of a photograph? So what I want to say, first of all, is that Georges Didier Berman, who is a French art historian and critic and philosopher, said that when we talk about images, we always talk about a montage. And this is what I'm doing when working with text and image. An image needs often a context. So literally, I use it as working with the text. So the dimension of a photograph. Denis Roche, a French photographer who is also a writer. So that's a lot of interest for me. Said that a photograph is the horizon folded in four. So I suppose that makes a page or a sheet of paper. And then he wrote a book called Dépôt de savoir et de technique. So a photograph is about technique, a certain technique, and it's about deposit. And then I think the other dimension of a photograph is the trace. A photograph is a trace. And then here I've got the help of Georges Didier Berman again. And a photograph is always an anachronistic presence. It's a present, but out of time all the time, in a way. And it has to do with loss and left. And obviously, so this idea of trace is linked with the idea of print, obviously. And like a footprint, so a photograph would work like a footprint. And Georges Didier Berman sees in that footprint, for example, space becoming time. You know when you see a footprint that somebody passed there earlier. But it's the opposite as well, it's the inverse. Time is becoming space. Because the past, you can see it in the footprint there. Is it all right? Yeah? Carry on. So I think that question of print and imprint and the question of a surface of the page of a sheet was very interesting for me when I was browsing the trilogy Connemara from Tim Robinson's. And so we can ask what are the dimensions of Tim Robinson's Connemara? So that's a big question, so I won't answer that. But I tried to focus in the book how Tim Robinson approached the landscape of Connemara. So obviously, he practices the landscape. He practices the landscape through botany, geology, history, poetry, folklore, song stories, zoology, etc., etc. He's none of that. He's not an archaeologist. He's not a botanist, etc. But when I was rereading Connemara, the trilogy Connemara, well, obviously he's a writer and a cartographer. So this is what I use in the book. The book is an anthology of texts from teams and photograph. So I wanted to, and so I focused on how teams approach the landscape. And so I chose a few approaches, and one was the horizon, and talking about landscape, for example. And when he approaches, so the horizon is very problematic, because the horizon is a disappointment. You cannot make an appointment with the horizon. It's impossible. As soon as you take a step forward, the horizon goes back one step. So it's impossible to reach. And I will quote Tim Robinson. A range of paradoxes appears on the horizon, poetic answers to logical questions, the rational solution of problems, the posing of which is an irrational act. My preferred territory lies between aesthetics and logic. That's in My Time in Space. So, for example, so we cannot touch the horizon. And for example, Tim, obviously, there is an approach which is typical for Tim, which is walking as well. So he decided at some point to walk along the shoreline. So this is one line you want to follow and to trace in his maps, for example. But then it's some kind of a disaster again, because where is the shoreline? Because of the tide and because of dimension. The shoreline for human beings is not the same as for a very small fish or a prawn or a crab, for example, or a horse. So, and then he comes up with the idea of the fractals. So Benoit Mandelbrot, the mathematicians, discovered the fractals, and he uses this in a way to approach the landscape as well. And talking about aesthetics and logic, for example, Teams reads the works by Ludwig Wittgenstein, for example. So there is different approaches like this. So I try to use that as well in the book. So just to say that at the end, the only lines that Tim Robinson could trace was the lines of his maps and the line is writing. That's the only one, well, in my opinion. And hence, I wanted to focus on Tim's writing. I wanted to focus on what's a book, what's a page, what's a print, what's an imprint, what is it to have a landscape put into prints. And this is the link between the photographs and Tim's text, that idea of print and imprints, and of the page. And as well, so there is in some way different poetics. There is a poetic of the archives as well now. And there is, so through writing, there is, I wanted to show, for example, which is, Oh, sorry. No. Okay. So this photograph, for example, so I wanted to, in a way, this book was as well done for, I wanted people to go back to Tim's text, and I wanted to focus on the different, so it's an earlier version, so it's not exactly like this in the book. So for example, Tim's writes, middle distances were gray on gray. Lakes lay like deflated clouds on the blurry levels. So with the photograph, we are in front of Derrickley Island, and we're seeing the island through the windscreen of a car with the drops on the windscreen. So I wanted, in a way, to show how poetic is Tim's language. These drops, blop, 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 in this sentence, we have all these sounds. So I wanted to add this. It was, in a way, the same idea on the windscreen of the car. Or, for example, this one. So about the rhetorics in Tim's writing. So this is the one on the right, is it? Yeah. Left for you. It's in a way an illustration of a chiasmus. You know this rhetorical figure when there is two terms that crosses each other. For example, if I read the quotation underneath, while walking this land, I am the pen on the paper. While drawing this map, my pen is myself walking the land. So the photographs would, in a way, is an image of the style and the idea of the chiasmus, so which is somehow an exchange between two terms. And it's about the distance between two terms. And this photograph is called Erosion. And there is another link there because I was thinking about physically about what is it to write, what is it to make a book. And if you have a pencil, if you write with a pencil, this is just erosion. That leave a deposit which became a trace on the page. In a way like glacier over Ireland that left their trace and their deposits as well on the landscape. And another one, for example, would be sorry about that. So this one, for example, so I wanted as well to, this photograph somehow is, sums up how teams write, in a way, how teams compose these books. So for example, you have different chapters, like these different pieces of wool on a barbed wire, and they're all linked together. And this is the writing. There is echoes in all of them, in all the chapters that you can follow as well. And obviously, I was very interesting about, so I questioned the idea of surface, of plain surface as well, which a book is that. It's a plain surface. That a book is just a plain surface that you unfold and fold. Unfold and fold. This is what you do. And obviously, there is a strong link there, I hope, with, for example, his maps. And you know the company he runs is called Folding Landscape. This, if maybe I can talk a little bit about these photographs as well. You see that it is very flat. It's gray. There is no strong perspective. What you do, and the focus is on the barbed wire a little bit on the right. So I was trying to play with the page. For example, the idea of the page and the idea of reading, as we do when we read Tim's books. So we start from top left and we finish to bottom right. So I was playing with these lines. So this is why there is no perspective. It's very flat. And in a way, the only sharp element in this photograph is just on the right of the bigger wool bit there. So it's more like a point that would glide, or like when you're scanning an image with your eyes. And obviously, I was trying to slow down the gaze on this photograph. So because we read from left to right, and because the focus in that photograph is on the right, so you tend to follow a line that you are reading. But in fact, with the wind coming the other way, that you can see in the wool, that draws you back the other way in order to slow down the gaze and to make it maybe it's some kind of wool gathering, some kind of a reverie, some kind of a mobile reverie. Mobile reverie, that's an expression from Tim. So this is what I wanted to do as well in the book. So what I wanted to do as well is that I didn't want it to preoccupy the viewpoint. I don't want to preoccupy you. How nice? So I want the viewer and the reader to exercise his own freedom. I don't dictate one point of view. That's why, for example, often the horizon is blurred, and there is no perspective. Or on the program, for example, I wanted the anchor, the intersection there of the anchor, to cross the horizon, to write it off. So usually no perspective, a lot of flatness, a lot of platitude, a lot of grays in these photographs. But this is also because of the nature of the landscape over there. There is often a very diffuse light, and all becomes very gray and very flat. So I wanted as well so the reader to experience these moments in the Connemara landscape. And the rhetorics of themes is very much in relation to nature and people. And there is two words in Tim's text, two words he created, which are geophany and ecosphere, E-C-H-O sphere. So I was playing with all these as well. So just to finish with the landscape and nature and book and writing and text and the human imprint as well. I think we talk about carbon imprint, for example. So there is that kind of sense nowadays as well of how the human imprints nature and the landscape. And so the idea is not to dictate to viewpoint, and the idea is for the reader to ask the question, where does the landscape speak from? And this is what I think Tim is trying to do, in a way. Is the landscape speaking from an old lady? Is it from a young boy? Is it speaking from a cockle? Is it speaking from a farmer or a horse or the wind or, I don't know, the glacier that vanished years and years ago? It's speaking from everywhere like this, through one eye, the eye that we read when we read Tim's text. And there is an analogy with photograph as well. I don't know if you notice how photographs are very good listener. They listen to you. It's very, especially if you have a photograph that is in strong relation with your own history. They listen to you very carefully. And so I think there is a big, there is a question of enunciation. Where does it speak? Where do we speak from? So there is an example of this in, for example, in these. Well, it's just one of two. So you see that where do we speak? Where does the landscape speak? So in these photographs, I was trying to play with who is the I there, who's speaking, and from where. And I think, well, that's how much time?
Nearly finished.
Nearly finished. Okay, all right. And so, just to finish, maybe also about the design, the general design of the book. So I wanted, in a way, to give a portrait of a landscape. So that's why I was playing with the landscape format, and inside of it, so I was trying to play with the landscape format and the portrait format, and which is also, it's an A4 format, so it's a very common format that you use every day. And the idea was to have a landscape in front of you, and the idea of the A4 and all this format A4, A3, A5 is that if you fold it, you keep the proportions, and this comes from the idea of the book being folded. Before when we would print a book, the octavo, the quarto, etc., etc. So I wanted that idea as well behind the book. The thing is, as well, I wanted to play with the gaze, as hope you saw. And if you've got the book in front of you, you cannot, at a normal distance of reading, you cannot grasp the whole double page. I tried to make a book I tried to work on double pages. So if you're at a normal distance, you cannot see everything sharp, like when you're in the landscape. When you've got a photograph of a landscape, in a way, sharp from the foreground to the horizon, that's a pure fiction. You'll never see that with your eyes. So I wanted to play with that as well. So your gaze has to move. And this is what I want to do as well, to instigate a movement. And this is what Tim's does as well in his writing. And for example, so I played with quotation from Tim's. I played, obviously there is links. There is an interplay between different ecotones, would say, and the writing, the Connemara landscape, and the photograph, and the images. And I wanted, so I was playing with the layout of the book, and the idea was to get some discomfort. Because the Connemara landscape, I think, is not a very comfortable landscape, especially with the weather, the climate. And for example, when you hold the book, it goes like this. So it's not a coffee table book. So forget about tea and biscuits, because when you travel through the landscape, you go up and down and right and left all the time. Okay? So maybe a coffee table book with a hardcover, with gray linen, for example, if it's a book about the Burin, perhaps. But here, this is Connemara. So that's it. And for example, another type of discomfort, sorry about that, don't bite the book. About the panorama, so there is a picture of Moulmein. I don't know if you know the place. So this is looking, let's say, south. And this one is looking kind of north. And so these two photographs were taken on the top of Moulmein. So if you're sitting like this, you cannot have the panoramic view. So what you have to do, you have to stand and look it like this. I see, sorry. So you have to look it like this if you want to have an idea of Moulmein. And so it's a different scale. I was playing with scale as well. And that's why there is as well a representation of Moulmein by Tim through the map. And behind, this is all quotation about Tim's writes about what it is to be on a path, the idea of balance, So if you want that page just balance on the top of my main. And for example, another discomfort perhaps would be, I have to finish?
Something like that.
Okay. So I can finish now?
If you like, well, thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off
No,
your
it's fine.
embodiment of the stance of the book. And you know, De Boer once had a book bound in abrasive material, so it could never go on a coffee table.
Very good.
Just if I think we've got a little bit of time before lunch, being a little way away. But is there anything in the dialogue between your two talks, really anything, Justin, that occurred to you?
Yeah, I was sort of curious that, Nicolas talks about sort of relationship between text and image, and photograph, but in a way, this book is very much a photographic book. It's very reflexive about photography. So, the essay begins with an image of sprockets, which sort of shows the film. Even the image to the windscreen gives it the sense that it is a photograph rather than sort of an image that sort of sucks the viewer in to the landscape. It's very much saying this is photography. I was just kind of curious about sort of why you approached it in that way, to sort of really sort of be reflexive about photography and being a photographer in the landscape.
Well, because I think my approach to team's work was very much about how we went into the landscape. So I wanted in a way to be on the same tone and reflect about how do we approach a landscape and how, as a photographer, can I approach the landscape. So for example, all these questions about lines and horizon and dimension, the photographs has a very simple answer, just cut. You've got a frame, just cut it. So it doesn't matter about the horizon, doesn't matter what's behind you, left, right. So this is very different approaches, but at the same time, as I said, because it's so anachronistic present, the photographs, there is a sense of, when I was talking about the trace, there is a sense of the past and even of what's coming up. So for example, when you see these photographs there, there is a mirror there. The mirror you see on the road sometimes for cars, so to look for traffic coming. So this is another dimension in the photographs itself, in this round mirror. And this is maybe the road you just come from, or maybe it's the roads you will take. Could be both as well. Often in Panorama you have to, go back all the time. What was the question?
Time for a couple of questions or points before we make off for the lunch and exhibition. Anyone else?
Nicolas, is there also the trace of the photographer in your photograph?
Yes, everywhere. It's like that's why I was interested about to take on board. I was very interested about team's text. It's when you read team's text, it's I did that, I went there, etc. I'm telling a story. The I doesn't disappear. Okay, and it's the same in photography. The photographer is in front of every photograph. I mean the way I practice photography, going into the landscape and taking it. So I'm in front of it all the time, as you are as a reader. And there is that sense of a line, of some kind of alignment, and the antiquity Tom is talking about, and that every reader more or less is in the same location when it opens up a book. So I was playing with that. And the photographer, is everywhere. And I wanted to put emphasis on that as well, not to forget that there is no sense it is all fiction photography. I don't use it as to document anything. Obviously, there is an aspect of it you cannot forget about. But that's why I wanted my shadows sometimes to appear. So it's like things text. Things everywhere in the text.